Well, Evan, let's start with you. Um, Before we get into some of your character details and how you got into this, the show became Netflix's second biggest ever English language series, with more than 1 billion people watching it in the first couple of months. I know, we know true crime is popular, but did you imagine those kind of numbers?
No, absolutely not. No.
You've been described as a chameleon, which I think this show highlights. How was it to get into this character? How did you do it, and how was it? How did you feel to embody Jeffrey Dahmer?
Yeah, it was difficult. I think I started with watching the Stone Phillips interview, reading as many books and articles, and watching and listening to his interviews over and over. And then I went into the physical stuff, how he walks, talks. The psychology is so complicated for Jeffrey Dahmer. And yeah, he just has this worsening compulsion, worsening alcoholism, and it was incredibly difficult, but just sort of approached it one thing at a time, and again, just tried to immerse myself in it and learn as much as I possibly could.
Were you doing the physical side of preparation separate to the psychological side of that? Those two things sound like they were separate processes.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, they sort of took place simultaneously, but they were definitely compartmentalized, and I had to, I wore weights on my arms to keep his arms down. He doesn't really move them when he walks. Is
that harder than it looks?
A little bit, yeah. I think it's very unnatural. It's very strange. He's a very straight back. I tend to hunch over. So a lot of these things, I wanted them to be second nature, so I really worked on them and was obsessive about them, so that I wasn't thinking about any of that when we were shooting.
Yeah. You said when Ryan sent you the script, you thought it was challenging and difficult, and that was part of the reason you had to say yes to it, even if it terrified you. Would it have not been easier just to do a rom-com?
Yeah, it was going to be an incredible challenge, but I think the writing, it was so smart and very careful to show many different perspectives, not just Dahmer's. And that was one rule that we had shooting this, was that it was never going to be told from Dahmer's POV. And the intention of the series was to show how the system failed the victim's family members, neighbors who tried to sound the alarm over and over again, and he was allowed to carry on committing these horrendous acts. So it felt worth it to me to dive into it and really push myself.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to bring in Niecy. You play Glenda Cleveland.
Thank you.
As Evan says there, it's about this idea that people weren't listening to some people who basically knew what was going on. And Glenda, who I understand your character is a composite of both Glenda Cleveland and Pamela Bass, two people who were in the area who kind of suspected that there was, or more than suspected, I think, that something was going on. How did you, I guess, firstly, what was it about Glenda that you were interested in playing? And I guess, as Evan says, the show being from the point of view of others other than Jeffrey, what was that like for you?
Well, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. Let's start there. Because for me, when Ryan Murphy calls, he has you at hello. It's, hey, I want you to do this thing. And I was just like, okay. And then after I got the scripts, I was like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? And then as I began to read, my heart began to break, because for many wrong reasons, this woman was not heard. She was not believed. And I've been at those places in my life. I know people who've been at those places where you are very marginalized. You are seen as less than. Your voice and your thought doesn't matter. So then once the tears came, I was like, yeah, of course I'll do it, because I wanted so desperately to give a voice to someone who had gone unheard for so long. And it was important for me to get it right, you know. And Glenda Cleveland had passed away by the time we started this filming, but I was able to hear her voice in the phone calls that she made. I was able to read anything I could get my hands on. And you know, not surprising now that you've seen the series, there wasn't much.
Why do you think she wasn't heard? There's some moments in this that are just her thinking that something's going on, you know, things that may be going on in the apartment. But then there's a couple of other scenes early on where you just think, like the police letting the child go back into the apartment building with Jeffrey. Why do you think she wasn't heard?
Well, I think she was a Black woman in a neighborhood that was, you know, over-policed in the wrong way. And where she was really trying to be a help to the community, she was told that she was misusing 911. And it's a resource for good citizens with real issues, not your foolishness. And you are listening to people be murdered right next door. I mean, it's extremely painful, and you know, if I think about it too long, my eyes get so flooded with tears. I don't want to cry my fake eyelashes off in front of y'all. But there is a lot of pain that I wanted to make sure she finally got to share her voice and her story with the world, because she went unbelieved for so long. Yeah,
you hear that in the final episode with the 911 call, don't you? You hear her literally on the phone with the emergency.
And I'm grateful that Ryan called me, because a lot of people know me for comedy, and they're like, "Oh, she's so funny," and I'm like, "Well, she's an artist, first of all, and she can do other things," and so I'm very grateful that someone came along and saw me like I see myself. And I got to share my art with the world in a different way.
Yeah, because you say most people know you for comedy, or they know you for other types of drama, right? You've been in other dramas that are maybe perhaps slightly less dark and intense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you know, the drama side is relatively new in my career. I've been around the block a few times. And, you know, this lane is new. And so I'm happy. Thank you guys for receiving it so well. Thank you.
Now, if Evan could just get a comedy, I think if we could get Evan into comedy, it would be perfect. That would be our goal, because he's very funny guy.
Yeah, different type of story for this one, I guess. Paris, episode 6, which you directed, shows what Evan and Niecy's talking about, this idea that showing the victim side of this story. You know, showing these people as more than just a statistic. How do you go about directing that? How do you go about showing that?
Well, I actually think the whole series does that. I think it starts out with a guy who's trapped in a room who gets out and reveals who this killer is, who's finally arrested. And it ends with Niecy's character still unheard, but trying to fight for the people who are voiceless. And if you've actually watched the whole series, you see it moving towards justice, basically moving towards the community. And in episode 6 was the first time we got a Black, deaf, gay protagonist. And, you know, he is the protagonist of that story, and Evan plays the villain. And he lives his life as a man until he meets Jeffrey Dahmer and everything changes. And I think that focus on the victim was one of the most important things to me. And I actually say it was the most difficult thing I've directed in probably 20 years. Because of my personal feelings about Jeffrey Dahmer, which are very strong, but because I was so committed to taking these characters, especially the actors who play them. I think some of them are here, Rodney Burford and Michael Anthony Spady and Jared DeBus, 3 deaf actors we don't see very often, and getting to elevate their performances and to see their humanity. Oh, there you are. Those are the things that I really cling to, and that was really the joy of it all. And I think Evan, and working with Evan, and you know, they had various levels of experience, but their performances were extraordinary. So I felt really blessed by that. And then on top of that, I have Niecy Nash in the finale doing, you know, crazy great acting. And I said, okay, so this series will be about the people that were unheard, and the people that Jeffrey damaged that kept living, that kept going on, and we're telling their story. And I'm really, really proud that we did that.
I mentioned that phone call, but it was interesting that Jeffrey Dahmer's death happens and then we see the phone call. So it sort of leaves us on the moment of still this idea that they're unheard, rather than focusing perhaps on the death of Jeffrey Dahmer. Was that as intentional as it sounds that yours?
It absolutely was, because it's even today, and when you look at the clips that we showed, this is still happening. This unheardness of people of color, this ignorance of people of color. You see what's happening in Nashville. So the story really has a resonance to today. I mean, it's about Jeffrey Dahmer in title only, but it's really about the systemic racism that allows this sort of thing to happen for so long without us fighting back.
Yeah. Evan, you mentioned doing a lot of research and the psychological pause. Is it true you stayed in character while you were making this?
Yes.
Well, it's difficult. I don't know how people can stay in full character. It always. I mean, you have to interact with crew, directors, castings like that. I think.
Evan, you know, I did not meet you until after this series wrapped. The real Evan. I did not meet you.
Well, that's true. Well, you know what? Here's what. You're such an amazing, lovely, warm, hilarious person, and I think a lot of our scenes were coming from a place of contention. And I was worried, so I would say, "Hey, good morning, how are you?" And then I would kind of like go over into my little hole and not say anything, because I was worried that we wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to do that, to be angry at you.
And I thought you were a mean old lion at first. and then I realized, I said, "Oh, this baby is in his process." And then I respected it, and then I understood it. But I was like, "He don't like me. Everybody like me. What's going on?" But yes.
I loved you. I secretly loved you, and I love you even more today.
Thank you, Evan.
Have you managed to get him out of your head yet?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, on that note, I feel like that's a great place to please thank Evan, Niecy, and Paris.
Thank you.